All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mindgasms. So, we've got Mask, aka Tristram, back here. And of course, the Woke Pathist, aka the Woke Centrist, aka Dusty Cubes, aka Dustin Cubit. And we're going to do another nerd discussion here about Shadows of Self, which is book 2 in era 2 of Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. And era 2 is kind of fantasy western. And this one kind of goes from fantasy western to murder mystery to trying to stop a terrorist plot, which ends up involving a sort of demigod attempting to kill a god. So, and there's lots of stuff, cool stuff in here, especially bringing in more stuff to do with the Cosmere at large, Brandon Sanderson's interconnected universe in which most but not all of his fantasy stories take place. And it's cool. And of course, there's the hard magic system brought in from Era 1, but it works differently because there's more advanced technology. There's all sorts of interesting stuff going on. So let's start with you there, Dusty. What do you think about Shadows of Self in general?
I like that they really centered it around the theology of this world.
Yeah.
So we're just talking about really fleshing out that back end. So a lot of it, I think the overall theme, especially when we get to the end of this, is pretty much free will and how
Mm-hmm.
much do individual players actually affect their own lives and fates. So I thought that was a pretty interesting thing, and I also thought there were some pretty fun moments when they're talking about the theology of this world, especially of how well informed they are about their own theology. Interestingly enough, the God harmony of this world has literally written a Bible that kind of details the past, although he purposefully omitted some information about um, hemalurgy or hematurgy, is that what it's called?
Hemalurgy.
Uh,
Hemalurgy,
Hemalurgy
yeah.
too, because I guess in my view, I guess he thinks that's kind of like an evil art, especially if you have to kill to produce the allomantic power in another.
Could you guys
So
could you guys remind me of the distinction between allomancy, hemalurgy, and I
Furikami.
forget feruchemy? Yeah.
yeah, I know allomancy is the metal. The power is derived by burning a metal. And of course, there's many different metals you can burn for various powers. And we have feruchemy, which you store an attribute to use later. That's how that one works. So you would store, you would make yourself lighter in order to use that extra weight in a later. That's why it's interesting too, because there's difference between storage and usage. Because you would think, oh, in order to make myself heavier, I have to store weight for a while to make myself lighter. So that's why you see wax most of the time isn't fully weighted. He's usually somewhat lighter than what he would be normally. Um, and then when you get to hemalurgy, it's about taking a power from something and imbuing it into another. As far as hemalurgy goes, I think it only works against allomancers, right? Does it work against ferochemists?
No, it does work against Furikamists. You just need different bind points.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, that's right. Because she did steal some
In
powers.
this
I
very
completely
book.
forgot about that. That's right. She did steal a couple powers. Yeah, at least from the one that had speed. And another
Who
thing,
stole powers?
When we get
Bleeder.
to the book, Bleeder does.
Yeah,
Oh,
Bleeder
okay.
steals some direct chemical powers.
Yeah.
So we have those three aspects of the magic system. And in the holy book, Hemalurgy is completely written out. And we do see that, AKA Death, Marsh, introduces Hemalurgy, at least the information about it, by giving a book
Yes.
to Marasi. And yeah, just like the interactions between, we know that there's some god on the horizon based off of what is said at the end of this book, and at least in even the end of the first book, where we have Miles 100 Lives claiming power from some other deity. But yeah, they really delved deep into Cosmere type stuff. Whenever I think of Cosmere, I'm thinking of more of like the deities that bind these worlds together.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of
yeah,
really interesting theological content in this book, like you're mentioning there, like Harmony, who was Sazed but became the combination of the gods of ruin and preservation at the end of Era 1 of Mistborn, and then Marsh, as you said, kind of comes in to defy his divine order, and then Harmony needs to get Wax's help because he's kind of constrained by his own rules against some levels of divine intervention, so he can do some things but not others, and that's kind of the part of the way the interactions between the way the interactions between gods works in the Cosmere. Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff, and of course Kelsier is in part of it too, and there's lots of interesting stuff to do with all that.
yeah, and it's interesting because Harmony almost seems as he is quite impotent compared to the other gods in the Cosmere, and that's simply because he has to literally keep everything in balance. So one little thing can affect another little thing, and we see that he uses other people as his agents. We have Wax, who is an agent of preservation, or was he ruin? I think Wayne is ruin and Wax is preservation. Even though
Oh
Wax
yeah.
does his fair amount of killing, but his cane of logos is that he's like a guardian type of character that wants to protect. And then Wayne is a bit more chaotic. It's not. I would say Wayne is. He's chaotic, but he's not like an evil character.
Yeah, that's a
But
good point too about how the other gods, like in the Stormlight Archive, like Odium, etc., seem like they're more powerful than Harmony, in like partially because he has to keep everything in balance because he's like the one major big god on Scadrial, as opposed to Roshar, in which there's more of this epic battle between gods taking place.
well,
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
I think the interesting thing about Harmony, though, is that since his main focus is on keeping balance, I would assume that the larger force acting against him, the larger force he's able to exert against that, because he is a balancing character. And I just thinking about this particular story, he uses the exact amount that's needed to counteract the things that are going against them. Because you won't see him use any type of overwhelming force. Like his agent Wax, and Wax, he's not exactly getting through this unscathed. At the end of this story, we do see that it is a bittersweet ending. Yes, he ultimately stops what happens, even though he didn't ultimately protect the governor, but they were able to get the city to calm down. There was a chaotic regime change in the city. But ultimately, he was able to stop the person affecting these changes. But even then, still a lot happened, and specifically, there were some revelations that really tore him up at the end.
Yeah, for sure. So, Tristram, what do you think about I guess, the book in general and those Cosmere aspects about the interactions between different gods, and maybe after that we should elaborate more on this kind of terrorist plot that gets involved with that too.
Okay. So not going into the plot, but going into the godlike themes. So a couple of things I think are amazing in Era 2 that are sometimes underappreciated, I think, is one of the things that Sanderson's books about Era in general is about the opportunity for a mortal to become a god, right? Like that is like a clear key point of like, what if, like if power makes you god, and a mortal can get that level of power, are they God? Is that what makes you God? And that comprehension. And so one of the things is with Mistborn, he's deep enough into it that we've seen that happen. Sazed was a regular guy. He is now capital G God in this book. But also, one of the things that's really cool is that Kelsier, who is most definitely not capital G God, is also kind of God in this book. And there's even some parallels, like Scadrial, the land of Mistborn, is the most like Earth, right? The most like Earth. And so the original series is like almost medieval era technologically, and technology has
it's
moved
more like epic fantasy in that way,
epic
kind
fantasy.
of. Yeah.
But it's an older era, right? It's pre-guns. Now we're in Western times and technology has moved forward. And that's really cool to see. But one of the things as well we see is that the people from the past who we know because we read their books, like Breeze is now called the Counselor of Gods, and Spook is called the Lord Mistborn. And Kelsier is the survivor and is absolutely worshipped.
Yeah.
Like, the most popular church is not the Pathians. It's the survivorists. Kelsier is a more popular god than the actual deity that's running this planet.
I like that. That's interesting how they're kind of like these rival religions competing with each other, and it's Kelsier's that's most popular. Yeah, that's interesting.
And
they're pretty opposite. Like the Apathians, they live a very Spartan lifestyle.
Yeah.
They the way that they worship is way different than the survivorists. And survivorists, like, I guess, are kind of like, I wouldn't say modern day Catholic. I would probably say like,
at that.
Yeah, they're kind of like Catholic, probably like pre Protestantism, like the height of Catholicism. So that's kind of like, okay, they got all these idols and there's a lot of extravagance. And then you have the Pathians, who's like and completely opposite, who are kind of like Zen monks who try to teach people on how to perceive these problems on their own, and instead of saying, hey, there's this priest that you gotta pay deference to in order for him to transmit your word to Kelsier or something like that. So I thought the contrast between these two religions was pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And one of the points in the book, and one of the points in the first series as well, is that he's quite careful to show that even these religions that you could consider false, right? Because we know Kelsier isn't a god, or do we? But he shows that like there's people who are quite capable of benefiting from the survivorist religion and do benefit and get comfort from it. And like one of the things that's really cool is that like Harmony is capital G God. Like he could rock up and go, hey, look at me be God. Everyone worship me. Like super obvious, right? But actually one of his only commandments is not to worship him. Like
oh yeah.
Like that's such a cool idea, is that one of the things he's saying is like, I have almost no rules. Like there's no rules except don't really worship me, figure stuff out. You're like, What god says that to you? And it's really
the weird
cool.
thing too is that about these two religions is that they're based off of the same text. So even in
that's
that
true.
text that Harmony wrote, he actually writes out Kelsier's role in Secret Wars, or I'm sorry, Secret History. So he does tell the people at one point in time, Kelsier was
Held
a god
preservation.
for a little bit. He held the power for a little bit. And that is, they make a nod to when there's kind of a theological discussion with a Pathian, and because there's something that happens between that these two religions that causes a huge clash.
Yeah.
But they do explain, like, oh, this one book explains both the Pathian religion and it also supports the survivorist religion. So I thought that was super interesting as well.
Yeah.
And it's also like one of the things that's good about Sanderson is it also mirrors again Earth, right? Like I'm like an old school Christian, and today's Sunday, and so I was talking to my kids about the Bible. We're talking about the Bible today, Old Testament, and we're talking about different parts of it. How the first 5 books are the law or the Torah, and the second 5 books are like, we're talking about the history, and then the poems, and then the prophets. And my daughter's like, the Torah isn't like that the Jewish book? I'm like, yeah, it just so happens that the Jewish book is also our book. And it's interesting that but they take some of it and see it one way, and we take this bit and we see it another way. But actually there's a huge overlap in a lot of religions, right? And we see this, and it's happened here in Mistborn. It just makes his religions more believable. That they're not like,
it's
one
funny
religion
too.
and the other ones are all clearly false, paper mache to be smashed down. Like, no. He's thought this through and he's tried to make it more interesting than that. And so I think that's really good. I also think it's cool how they've forgotten what inquisitors were, but that the only inquisitor left, who is Marsh, is called Iron Eyes now, and he is the personification of death. And
Right.
so everything's moved on, right? The crew have become these holy warriors, like Vin, who was this like deadly young chick, like murder chick,
The
has
ascended
become
warrior.
They're like Joan of Arc, and like Kelsier, who was really just a scam guy and extremely good at it, becomes like basically their version of like almost like a Jesus Christ like messianic figure. And it's just so interesting. Anyway, last point on this is now going to the wider Cosmere. The shards are all power, right? The power of Adonalcium was everything, split into 16 parts. Holding an entire section of that is incredible power, and it gives you the ability to do almost anything. So interesting that Sazed is, at the moment, mathematically the most powerful being in creation currently in the entire Cosmere, because he holds 2 shards.
Right.
And no other shard holds 2, right? So just mathematically, even if they're infinity each, he's 2 infinities. If you've ever had that argument, I'm 1 more than you, 1 more than anything you say, infinity more than you, infinity plus 1, infinity doubled.
I wonder if there's eventually going to be so much Cosmere crossover that there are going to be like god wars between gods on different planets, like Sazed
Infinity
versus
War.
Odium. Yeah, Infinity Wars. Yeah,
it's 100% what Sanderson's going for. But one of the things that's cool is the argument is, but if Harmony is super powerful, like he's double the power of Odium, why doesn't he go and just squash him? Yeah. Or how come Odium, even though he only has 1 shard, has managed to bust up 3 or 4 shards? And the point is, it's all about what Dusty said, which is that actually holding more power doesn't necessarily make you more proactive, because the ruin and preservation hold each other in abeyance. And I think it's also an interesting meta commentary on what some people use to justify their belief in God. Like, because one of the arguments is, if there is a God, why doesn't he just rock up and go, hey, look, here I am, super powerful God. You believe in me now, don't you? Yeah. Because
Yeah.
if God appeared in flaming power above New York City and just like blew up a few people who were in his opinion bad, his numbers would rise, right?
Yeah.
There'd be a lot of people like, okay, that's scientific proof. I'm up for this.
Yeah.
But
That's like one thing that I really like about the way that gods are explored in the Cosmere, because
correct.
like humans can become gods. So a god is like this position that is taken up by different people, and a god is not necessarily omniscient, which is interesting, which is one of the reasons why theology interests me, even though I'm an atheist, because I like learning about different perspectives on how people look at God. Like one that interests me, for example, is Alfred North Whitehead's idea of the immanent God, which is not omnipotent, and humans can change that God just as much as God changes humans, because there's like the God can interact with the world, but not directly, so it can interact with through other people. Like I really think about that sometimes when I think about like Sazed, for example, and other gods in the Cosmere, because they're not omnipotent and they can't necessarily be like all powerful divine intervention stuff. They have to get other people to work for them, and then they're not necessarily that god for all time. They're eventually going to be someone else who is that god.
And absolutely. But one of the things I really like about it is, like you say, it's an interesting take, right? And like we saw God versus God fighting at the end of Era 1, where Vin has preservation and she tries to use it, and Ruin also tries to use it. It's like, oh. And like I like it in the Harry Potter series when like the Prime Minister, there's a chapter where they talk to the Prime Minister and he's like, why don't you solve it with magic? And they're like, yeah, the other side's got magic too. It's like, oh. And like one of the things that's so cool here is that I personally adhere to the concept that that God could do all things. And so be like, well, why doesn't he? And I believe, and I go down the free will argument, but also down the actually God has more than one thought, more than one concept. And so like there is a part of God that is justice, right? And if you misbehave, justice should therefore punish. But then there's also a side of God that's like, I want to protect you, preserve you, allow you to live long enough to redeem yourself and work through it. And so these things are in balance. And in this, because he isn't dealing with capital G God, but his own version, which is, as you say, more limited, he can actually ask those questions in the book, but he doesn't answer them. He leaves it to the reader to decide if Harmony is wrong, right? And I love that. Like Harmony does
for
some
sure.
stuff, and he's like, Harmony is going, I can't do this because I need to try and preserve, but I can't do this because actually part of my job is to ruin. People have to die. I need them to die for the world to achieve its purpose. And so he's both. And that means in a way it looks like he does nothing, and in a way does too much. And so it's like a lot of people can look at that and go, if there is a God, would I just be really angry with him? Yeah, if he exists? And I'd almost prefer him not to exist, because if he did, why would this world be in the state it's in, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's a really cool way that Sanderson is using fiction to allow us to explore those ideas, but he isn't saying at any point, by the way, you should think this.
Yeah,
And
I
I
like
think
that a lot
that
too.
is very good. I think that is excellent as an author.
Yeah, me too. I love that. And yeah, so let's talk about
Let's go to the book.
let's talk about, I guess, kind of the themes we were talking about a little bit in relation to other aspects of the plot and the characters, because it kind of, like I was saying before, it kind of starts off as fantasy western like the first one is, and then kind of gets into murder mystery, and then as we discover more information in the murder mystery part, it becomes, oh, okay, now there's a terrorist plot and we have to stop the terrorist plot. And then as it progresses more and more, right up to the end of the movie, we see this whole Cosmere, all of these Cosmere implications and divine intervention. We find out that the terrorist plot was involved with basically a demigod trying to kill a god, and that gets into interesting aspects of how the characters like Wax and Wayne react to this, like how they're being influenced like by different gods, as you were mentioning.
Agreed. And like, again, one of the things against Sanderson's done here is the first, if you read Era 1, it's very much classic fantasy. Like, it's Sanderson's version of it, but it's classic fantasy, right? The hero group, and they go through and they win. But one of the things that's really interesting about this one is, like you said, the first book is like, it's like a heist. It's train robbers, you know. This one is like, as you say, murder mystery into like terrorist plot. And the next one's more like Indiana Jones adventure. You know, let's go find magical gizmos, and you know, a mysterious treasure. And but throughout it all, he's progressing his ideas and thoughts, moving towards, as you say, this grand conflict. Again, really different, really ballsy to try something like that, where like each book, your audience have to go, but if I like the first one, will I like this one? Because he keeps changing things. But actually, I love it. I love the fact that Sanderson progresses his characters, progresses his world, and we see the technological advancement during these books. Like,
yeah, like how it interacts with the magic system, and like in comparison to Era 1, but also throughout Era 2, as you were saying too. Like, one of the things that I liked with the first book, for example, and this book, is how the magic system impacts how you can have all these cool slow motion gun battles where you're like moving bullets around as after they're fired, and that kind of like Matrix style stuff, which is really cool.
So I love that, and I think the evolution of that technology is a cool backdrop to the development of the plot.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a question.
What?
Okay, so do you guys believe Kelsier is the kind of like the Jesus of this world? In a way, kind of like a subverted,
the survivorist church is set up that way, at least I would say. Yeah.
Okay, so that being said, do you think Sanderson eventually is going to have a resurrection because of this path that we have here?
He already did.
That would be interesting.
That already happened with the
Did
Chondra. But that's one of the things.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was a fake resurrection. And like, it's a whole implication, right? That if you want to read it that way, it could be saying, by the way, the whole Jesus Christ thing could have been faked with like a Chondra. Like that, like maybe someone walked around who called himself Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
What about the second coming?
Yeah.
Oh, that's totally a thing. But the thing is, I think he might do that in multiple ways, because it's not just going to be Kelsier, right? Because Kelsier is not a nice guy, right? Just to be clear. But also, like, I think we're going to see, I think in the Cosmere, he has set a limit to the books, right? So he has an idea for Armageddon. So I think that there might be a second coming, Kelsier-wise, that is the end of the Mistborn plot. But I think there'll be an apocalypse revelation-like moment, which will be the end of the Cosmere as we know it.
Oh, that'll be cool. That would be cool. I can so see, like I was asking you guys, and you said you thought so earlier, Tristram, like Harmony versus Odium or something like that. That would be so cool. And like
it's gonna be like the Justice League of Gods versus like the evil gods. It's gonna be like multiple gods against multiple gods.
You see is they can't like take each other out in the way you might think. Like they have to become vulnerable in order for them to be damaged, because they are basically infinity versus infinity. And like we saw when Rune was taking down Preservation, he had to destroy the things that Preservation represented. Like, he had to destroy the people to start breaking Preservation down and like units of power. And like, it's interesting. And even then he didn't destroy Preservation. The vessel gave up, but the power was there to be claimed by someone else. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like the
Yeah.
power
What do you
itself
think?
cannot be destroyed. And like when Odium killed Devotion and Dominion, they're dead, but their power is still sitting in the cognitive realm of Cell. And that's one of the reasons the cognitive realm is so freaking dangerous, because it's there. And I think we're going to see someone claim that power. And so, like the thing is, Brandon's also said that the Odium's getting better at this, right? That like he's realizing, and like someone said to him the obvious question, why isn't Odium just taking them all? You know, you're like, Pokemon, got to catch them all, right? Why not just get all 16? And it's because actually Odium realizes that if he picks up something like honor, it will change him as a person. It will actually stop him doing some of what he's doing. One of the reasons he can do what he does is because his urge, his power is pushing him to destroy. Whereas if he had one of the others, he might not be able to do that anymore.
Is that similar? Is that similar to how Marsh is kind of like the personification of death in this book?
Yeah, but Marsh doesn't hold a shard, so he's not.
Yeah, that's true. Of course.
Like the shards are meant to be so compelling that, like, if I'm Tristram Johnson, right, and I pick up cultivation, at first I'm still me, but pretty much cultivation's influence is so powerful. Like as a human being, I'm just kind of become that, because that need is so powerful. It's more than a human being can contain, and that's why you get vaporized. Like
I think Marsh was thought of as death because he represented ruin. He was basically his chief assassin at that time. So I don't know if you can consider him. Yeah, and he has that look too. He's the friggin' Inquisitor. That would be terrifying to anybody that's never seen one before.
Yeah, definitely.
Just like people came up with the Grim Reaper, right?
Yeah,
right. They imagine him black with a scythe and maybe dark. Like that's their version, because they're like, we've seen these things in the scary religious books, the angel of death, and we're like, maybe that's what death is, and like it just convolutes. And again, religion and mythology overlapping, and that's a real thing that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do want to see the second coming of Kelsier one of these days.
That would be pretty cool, man. That would definitely be cool. Especially like if he has to help people defeat Odium or something like that. That would be really cool.
Yeah, we're gonna have a Cosmere biblical Revelations, the last battle. It's gonna be
pretty cool.
We will see that.
That would be pretty cool, man. You mentioned, Dusty, the Conjura too. Yeah, that's a major aspect of this book. That's really cool. Like the whole shape-shifting aspect, and how there's someone going around pretending to be different people. And then at one point for a while, this Conjura is impersonating Wax's former fiance, who died at the beginning of the first book of Era 2 of Mistborn, and then becomes other people, and then that develops into more aspects of the plot about how we find out that this terrorist plot is connected to this kind of demigod trying to kill a god and all that. That's a really interesting aspect with the Conjura in this.
Well, it's more than just impersonating. She was.
Well, yeah. Let's not. That is. Let's talk about the plot first, Dusty.
Okay. One of the interesting things too about this book is how deeply they went into the Conjura, and I know from the past books, I didn't think about it that much, but this book made me think about it more. Was how much control the gods can have based off of how pierced you are. And we have the Conjura as the least pierced. They have 2. And then you have
creations.
Yeah, and then you have the Koloss, who had 5, right? So I think the rule is, in order to have direct control, there has to be at least 2 piercings, it looks like. And it looks like they called her crazy and unhinged, but was it really? What was she really doing? And that's the kind of interesting thing about this, is that, was she really crazy, or was this like an influence from outside? It's not really answered by the Khandra. They're like, yeah, she's definitely crazy and unhinged. But then again, these Khandra have two spikes, so they're basically God's servants, like completely.
But at the same time, we know from series 1 that the only things that makes them sentient are those spikes.
Right.
So if you've got the two things that make you sentient, you take one away, are you still fully sapient? And we know that like that's one of the ways you can kind of basically kill a Khandra, because it is to take away their spikes. That makes them into a mist wraith, and they're basically mindless. And if you leave them like that for too long, they lose their entire identity.
Well, we know there's two ways. There's the reversion back to mist wraith, and there's this new way that we find out in this book where they can completely
that hasn't
die.
existed previously.
Right.
They can use acid. They mentioned that's what they threatened to murder Orsir with in when they have him in the trap. He's in liquid form.
When they're going to execute him,
with acid, but the first thing they say is like they take his spikes, and that's what makes him like basically drop to goo. But it is interesting, this idea of free will, and one of the things in the book is as they discover that there's some stuff going on, and as he investigates, he finds out, as you say, that there is a bad person who we'll call Bleeder, who is going around killing people and seems unstoppable, right? And they investigate and they find out that there's a terrorist woman who's come to town. And at first they think it's her because they recognize that there's steel pushing involved, steel running, which is a ferrochemical ability. Then they realize that she has a giant hole in her chest. And because of the book given them by death, they realize, oh, someone's nicked her power. And then because a Khandra comes in called Milan, we then start getting all this Khandra intel. And one of the things that Bleeder does in this book, is she starts to take out the different things of God, because Harmony, she thinks, is an unjust and unworthy God. And what he's done is wrong. And he shouldn't be allowed to be God. But how do you kill God? And so what she does is she takes out his ability to affect the world. Because one of her problems is that he is an impotent God. Like he doesn't do enough. But also that he is, when he has done something, he's manipulated other people to do it, because that's the only way he can do anything. So to beat him, she starts to take out all the things that are his. She kills priests who would speak for him, and people listen to their lies. She takes out people who would be like the politicians, who are like propagating his lies about Elendil being great, because that's one thing, is God made a Garden of Eden in this world that no one ever left. Instead of a Garden of Eden that humanity left and had to work, they had this perfect place. And so because of that, there's some injustices in Second Era Mistborn, because Elendil's so great that the outer lands have got it really bad. And then, of course, she makes her plan to take out the Khandra. And it's so clever. It's such a clever plan. And I just want to say, it's one of the things in the book I did not see coming. And when it happened, I like twigged just as it started happening. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I know what she's going to freaking do. And it was amazing. And I was like, because the Khandra are like a safety net. Because you're like, once the Khandra get involved, you don't really need to fear anymore, because you can just shoot holes in them and they just don't care. Like Milan is like a super, like you called her a demi-god practically. Like there's no risk once they're involved. And the fact that she does this thing and takes them out and uses them to embarrass Harmony and to actually expose him was really clever, because they're like his angels, right? Like they're the servants of God, kind of almost under his control if he wanted to. And he clearly does it sometimes. And so it's like, this is really clever of her. And she's basically killing God by nullifying him, by taking out all his his sources of influence. Because as we've established, he doesn't act in a divine intervention-y way. Like when he wants to help Wax, he's like, Wax finds his guns. Like, instead of like, here's an angel to smite your enemies, it's like, I will help you. And again, we can see that you could say, is that God or is that just coincidence? And that's allowed to be interpreted. And I think that's really cool. But it's
you know what's really
idea.
cool? This is a series that you might want to look into, as they do a very similar thing in the Dresden Files when they're dealing with
I know,
like
I need to read the Dresden Files.
We're definitely going to do end up doing book chats on all of those books. We have to. That's probably like I said. I
already know that Michael is going to be Tristram's favorite character. I 100% know this.
Oh yeah, that would totally make sense. He's an awesome paladin. Yeah,
I'm not going to say much about him, but he's going to be your favorite. He's like the moral center of the universe, kind of.
He's kind of
know me well, Dusty.
Yeah.
I like my good guys good. They can be conflicted, but they should be good people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that plot's really clever. One of the things I want to ask you, Andrew and Dusty, is like, this is the second time he's done a Who's the Contra, right? He did it in Era 1, right?
Yeah.
I think that he legitimately does the plot different enough that this feels very original and doesn't feel like retreading old ground. But what do you think?
I didn't even think about that at all.
Yeah, I didn't either. I didn't even realize that parallel, actually. Yeah.
Because I have heard it said that, like, not only has he done the same plot, but he's done it in the same freaking book, because it's in book 2 of the first series and book 2 of the second series. The thing is, it's very different for me, I think, because in the first series, it's which one of the crew is the Condra, right? We think it's one of the crew, and it's which one of them is it. So there's like 8 people, and it's one of them, and of course, it's actually the Condra that we already know is a Condra. It's the Condra, which is what makes it so clever. In this one, it's not one of the crew. It could be anyone. And that's the idea. It's someone in the crowd. The random serving man could be the Condra. The bad guy over here could be the Condra. And multiple times they think they've caught her and they haven't caught her. And it's so clever. And they come up with things that make so much sense, like passwords and figuring out things. Like when he rescues Lord Harms, he asks him for something that only Lord Harms would know. Like he asks him about like their first meeting with his uncle, and he's like, "Wasn't that Wayne?" He's like, "You are the guy." And so, like, I think that's really well done. I think it shows that you can use what you've previously told us, which he does, without retreading it completely word for word and giving us a different experience. And I think Sanderson does.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like you totally. I totally didn't expect that, and I wasn't suspecting anyone of being a Condra.
Oh, did you guys figure it out, by the way, when you read the book? Do you remember? Like, did you know who Bleeder was going to end up being?
No, I didn't figure that. I didn't figure that out.
Twist for me.
I didn't figure that out in the first read of it, and I totally forgot in my reread of it too.
Yeah, because one of the things is obviously that Wax is protecting the governor from the coup, but the governor is bad, or we kind of start to realize he's bad. And Marassi is the one who truly figures it out, that he's bad, that he's actually corrupt. But there's a guy who's the leader of the police who's like, I work for him. He's the elected official. And she's like, yeah, but he might be corrupt. And he's like, are you sure? Because if you're not sure, that's like treason. And she's like, I'm pretty sure. He's like, pretty sure ain't good enough. And like, so we have these different conflicts because Wax, it doesn't really need to obey the law in the same way other people do. And it's a really cool thing where, you like you have the superhero trope of superheroes can like just smash through buildings and no one ever sends them the bill. And and
there's like a lot of property damage in superhero
and the police
movies.
in this, I think, are portrayed really interestingly because they portray the police as like there's people who have a problem with them, right? Like when Wax goes out to interview the people in the rough sector of town, he gets nowhere. And then Wayne goes and they tell him everything immediately because Wayne likes like those dirty coppers. It's like find out everything. And he is one, damn it. And like so they're completely unsuccessful. And like Marassi's just like Wayne mucking about, and then Wayne comes and literally drops the captured bad guy. It's like, how did you freaking do that, Wayne? They wouldn't even tell us anything. And Wayne's just like, they tell me everything. It's like,
yeah.
Wayne
is so,
and that was
Wayne is
Wax's
so great.
plan all along too, because Wax was in on it, but Marcy wasn't.
Yeah. Because Wax knows these people aren't going to talk to me, Mr. Cravat. That's not who they're going for. And it's so cool that him and Wayne have this bond. By the way, there are some people who utterly hate Wayne.
Oh, I love Wayne. I
Yeah.
love his personality, and I love how you gradually find out that his joking around constantly is actually a facade for this deep regret he has for having wronged a family, and he's endlessly making up for it, but he never mentions that to anyone because he's so kind of he's kind of like such a morally sound character, basically.
He is. But and I absolutely agree, Andrew. He's made horrible decisions in his past, and those have scarred him. And if you think about it, he did it as a kid, like he's a teenager when he shoots that guy, and under pressure. But the thing is, he doesn't ever excuse it to himself. He never says, "Well, they made me do it, and I didn't know what I was doing." He just accepts that it was something awful that he did. But look at what he's doing now. Like he is really doing a lot of good. And in many ways, Wayne is an absolute hero, but he's flawed. But actually, can't he be flawed and still like a cool hero?
Yeah.
In my opinion, yes.
In that aspect of his character actually reminds me of when we were just talking about the new Spider-Man movie, about how the first Spider-Man played by Tobey Maguire is the best because he has that deep moral regret of having allowed Uncle Ben to be killed by that robber who he let go.
Yeah. And let go for the wrong reasons. He was annoyed with the guy who he robbed. He's like, serves you freaking right.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So, yeah, absolutely. And so Wayne, like some people hate the way Wayne acts because Wayne does some things that people don't like. So especially
like
Wayne. Sorry?
Like stealing?
Yeah. But
he always says, "No, I'm just trading," and he always gives.
No, but actually, you know what? It's really interesting that if you get into the chats on Discord, which I don't recommend you do because they're a dark hole, but if you get into the chats, do you know that isn't what people have a problem with? They don't have a problem with him killing people, which he does, by the way, and they don't have a problem with him stealing, which he does, by the way, because actually those are acceptable bad traits to have, apparently. What people have the big issue with is the way he treats women.
Oh yeah, I've heard that before.
They hate it.
I mean, he's not like. I mean, he's kind of like Han Solo-ish that way, but he's not like it's not like he's a disgusting sexist pig or anything like that. He just likes women and stuff.
But what I'm saying is there are some things in 2022 that you're allowed to have as a character flaw and still be a likable person, and there's other things in 2022 that are considered unacceptable character flaws.
Yeah, like you said, you're allowed to murder and steal, but not be sexist.
For example, he's super into a lesbian, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't leave her alone when she says, "Leave me the frick alone."
Yeah.
And she shoots him to make her point. But the point is that there are some people like that is just unforgivable for me, and I'm like, but the murdering you can live with.
Yeah.
And it just shows that we have a different perspective. We have a different perspective. And I'm no better than anyone else, right? There's things that I find really jarring, and there's things that I don't find jarring. And it's the same for all of us. So it's just interesting. A lot of people, other people hate him for how he treats Steris, right? because Steris is people's baby, especially by book 3. And I love Steris, by the way, adore Steris. But the fact that Wayne has a problem with her, people have problems. Like, you can not like people. And people like Steris are hard to like genuinely tough to like.
Yeah.
And also, like, people are treating Wayne as if he understands what autism is. Yeah. Wayne doesn't have a freaking clue what autism is.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Like, he doesn't know, like, that Steris is, like, actually got a chemical imbalance and chromosomes missing that means that she acts in a way that is very strange. And actually, Wayne's probably got something wrong with him too. If you look at some of Wayne's idiosyncrasies and his multiple, like the way his personality switches. But the thing is that sympathy is not there for him because he's a lecherous guy. But actually, he's had an awful upbringing, a really hard life. Lost his parents at a very young age, and then went in with a bad crowd, killed someone with a gun, has regretted it ever since, and has basically been brought up by Wax as like a semi-surrogate dad. And so I think the Wayne character is excellent. I don't think he's the best character. I don't love him as much as I love Wax or Steris. But Wayne is a really interesting character. And some people say that they think that basically Brandon should make it clear that he disapproves of Wayne. They're like, the author should.
Why?
Because
that's not what Brandon Sanderson does. It's like how you were saying he doesn't directly say all of these religious messages are good and bad with the interactions with God in the cosmere, and he doesn't say that with characters either.
Agreed. And even the Lord Ruler, right? There are people who say the Lord Ruler is unbelievably amazing and great, and there's some people who say he's awful. And Brandon says, you decide. Like, did he do a good job or did he do a bad one?
He's
really, people hate Wayne that much. I find it kind of nuts.
I won't, because I don't think you should bother. But if you want to go on some of the like literally 17th Shard, right? The fandom, you go on their Shardcast. There are some of the members of that team who have a serious problem with the character of Wayne, specifically on the issues I have named, and have said Brandon should be more clear and outspoken that as an author, he should make it clear that Wayne is wrong. And,
this is ridiculous.
That 17th Shard podcast is where I've heard that too, and also the opinion that the Lord Ruler was actually a hero or that sort of thing.
But
in the era that this takes place, though, this is kind of acceptable and par for the course.
Yeah, but people do that all the time. People do that all the time. Like when you have films that are now banned because they portray things that in the 40s people were just accepting, but now are like too racist to be allowed. And you think, whoa, like, you know, when you show like things like Song of the South, that movie, you cannot get it. Not even on Disney Plus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like it's impossible to find.
Basically. Because in it, there are slaves portrayed who are not, and it is not portrayed as a bad thing openly. They don't say, by the way, this film is about how slavery is bad. It isn't. It's clear that there are slaves and they seem okay. And it's not at all, there's no comment on, by the way, slavery is bad. Not even a hint of it. And that is just not acceptable in 2022.
Right. And like historically at the time, that would have been normal because people would have thought it was acceptable, right?
Yeah, well, definitely there is the portrayals that we see nowadays are much more historically heavy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can say that there were slaves who were not as mistreated, but you've got to be pretty clear that and it's just interesting.
Yeah.
Like you've got it's a very sensitive subject, and
definitely
you've got to be really careful with it. And so what I'm saying is that I think that comment wouldn't have been made, but I don't want my author to tell me, by the way, this is the right morality for you to have. and this is the wrong morality for you to have. I want him to portray it and let me decide if I agree or not.
Yeah, I like
think
that
Sanderson
too.
does that, and that's why I disagree with Wayne. I think Wayne does treat Steris in particular in an unfair way, but actually, I don't need Wayne to be me. Like, if I
Of
wanted to look
course.
at my own life, I'd go read my diary.
It would be boring if everyone were this morally upstanding character or something like that. And yeah, I prefer the author not directly moralizing at me or something like that. But I can see the merit of that sometimes too. Like one that fantasy nerds have talked about before is that Lightbringer series that you and I have read, Dusty. I don't know if you've read it, Tristram.
I've read Lightbringer, love
Okay.
Lightbringer.
Yeah, the ending of the series, people talk about how some people complain about how the author was directly delivering his message too much, but I kind of like the ending of it just because it's interesting the way that he did it.
One of the things about Lightbringer is, again, I can totally see the ending does feel a bit different from some of the rest of it but the thing is, one of the things he does is you go meet God, right? Literally, and they have the conversation and they ask some of those hard questions. And one of the things he's obviously saying is, if I freaking met God, I wouldn't be letting him off with a bit of worship. There'd be like some questions asked.
Yeah.
And what he does is say, this is one of the answers. And in this world, this is the answer that is freaking given. And I think, like, love it or hate it, right? At least he answered the freaking question.
Yeah.
Because I would have called it, because it's not quite a Deus Ex Machina, because the God isn't actually in the machine. It's kind of right there in your face.
Right.
But I really liked that kind of trope there. I thought it was really interesting in the way that he did it. Like he didn't make it a Deus Ex Machina. It's like, okay, actual God is coming down to touch down and affect things in the ending here. That's pretty good stuff.
But so I think Wayne's character is a really interesting character to look at, because we can see Wayne's character from the past when he was the kid sidekick, where we get a couple of glimpses in the flashbacks. We can see Wayne in book 1, where he's the guy who's getting Wax back into it. He's the one sucking him back in to the life, because Wayne's the one who gets Wax back.
Yeah.
And then Wax is the straight man, right? In their duo. Wayne's the quirky one and Wax is the straight one. And that's how they play off each other. And we also get to see in this book, we get to see how he goes to the school. So we see that where you see him like go to the girl, and the girl says, "Who's this?" "It's my daddy, and you killed him. And will I ever forgive you for that?" And the answer is no. And you see where Wayne puts his money. You can see how, like you said, that Wayne uses some of his bombastic bravado and comedy to hide the fact that he will never, it seems, properly forgive himself for what he's done. And like Wayne, we know, has a psychological reaction to even holding a gun. Like, he doesn't just not do it. When he does it, his hand shakes, like he's having basically post-traumatic stress reaction. And like, that tells me, like, Brandon doesn't say, by the way, Wayne has PTSD.
Yeah.
But he just does show instead and lets us decide how much that's affecting Wayne, etc. And so it's really cool, because it actually means that Wayne ends up killing less people than Wax by about 100, because he usually is hitting them with sticks and Wax is usually shooting them with bullets.
Yeah. That's another good point too. People complain about him being sexist, yet it's okay for him to murder, but also Wax murders way more people than he does, but he's not as sexist.
Yeah, it's interesting. And people don't like it that Wax doesn't call him on it. They think that Wax should be the voice of the author and very early say to Wayne, "You can't act this way. You're out of order." And again, I think it's out of touch a little bit with the fact that these characters are meant to be real-ish, you know?
Yeah.
And the thing is, do you have mates who are different from you, who have different moral backgrounds? I hope so. And so, like, I have friends who are very different from me, and like, for example, like swear a heap, and don't think that
like me.
limiting yourself to one woman is a big deal at all, and that's not part of their schedule. Can you imagine if I was like that guy who was like, well, I can't be friends with you. You like sleep with women and like don't like honorably marry them. Like, can you imagine that discussion? I would be seen as such a prat for being like that. And yet that's what they're saying. They're saying, well, if you have a moral stance, you should start like making sure all your friends not. He's known and loved Wayne a lot longer than he's known and loved Steris.
Yeah.
Wayne saved his freaking life like 30, 40 times. Like, this isn't just some bloke he met down the pub one day. This is someone he basically brought up from 16. Like, yeah, he probably has some traits Wax doesn't like, but is Wax going to moralize on him? Probably not.
Yeah.
And anyway, I love Wayne. I don't like him as much as a lot of other characters, but I think he is one of the most genuinely interesting characters. And his development in this series is excellent.
And the differences between Wax and Wayne and their interactions is one of the things that makes their relationship one of the most interesting aspects of Era 2.
Agreed. Here. Great.
What do you guys think of the prologue of this book?
Love it.
Me too.
So this is the one where they introduce how Leslie and him first met. That was so cool. Like, I wanted to read that. Oh, they're gonna do the introduction of Leslie. But I thought it was like a bit of just like an Easter egg. And then I'm like, oh, it's because they're gonna investigate the Leslie tragedy. But actually, once again, frickin' Brandon Sanderson being a dark genius, he's actually using these prologues to tell a story within a story, right? Because I'm like, oh, that's how Wayne used to be.
It's a bookended story. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again. I talked over you.
It was definitely like a bookend that he was trying to produce here. I didn't even, like, when I first read it, I was like, oh, cool, a little bit of history. Like, I didn't know how much of an impact that was going to have on this actual book.
Yeah. So
what did you think about the prologue, Dusty?
I thought it, like, once you get through the whole context of it, because the prologue itself contains a clue in which Wax figures out that Leslie is Leslie. So it's like super important, but I didn't know how important it was until like the twist ending of this book.
And that's great writing right there.
Right. And I love like his novice ways on how he was totally not prepared for the being a lawman out in the sticks. Like, he just went into this place, made a big mess for himself, and he had to be bailed out by somebody. Well, because this is what gets set up. Somebody who worked for the bad guy but ended up switching sides. Yeah. Which we probably even think at this point was like a contrived thing as well.
It was clever.
Yeah.
And like the way that she's like, she tells him everyone in this place works for Granite Joe. And then they run over and they get to the bit, and then she pulls the gun and is like, I told you, everyone in this building works for Granite Joe. He's like, but you have nice legs. And then she shoots Granite Joe. Awesome. Great moment. Very Western.
Definitely.
So let's just talk about the reveals. Like, how did you feel about the reveals? Like the innate reveal. Like, when they've been trying to save the governor from the Condra, and then they realize, like, too late, that the governor, like...
The governor has been a Condra for a month or something like that?
Well, since the beginning of the book. Like, we've never seen Governor Innate. So the thing is that from the very beginning, when they're thinking someone's trying to assassinate him, he is the person. And so that is just super clever. That is just super clever.
Yeah, I love that.
So he killed
He killed the
his
governor first.
brother after the fact. So he killed the
Correct.
brother second, which is interesting.
And so the thing that's so clever about that is, like, you know how in the original trilogy, it's the Kandra that they know is the replacement Kandra. So it's like you would never expect the Kandra to be the Kandra. And in this case, the person who the Kandra is trying to kill is the Kandra. It's like, what? It can't be. And so they're like, but he knew all the passwords because he was already the Kandra when you gave the passwords. And so clever. And so I did not see that coming. When I found that out, I was like, oh, that's the big reveal of the book. Right?
And then there's another one coming at least.
And so, Dusty, you were going to talk about this. What did you think about the next reveal after they find out? Because they discover he's the Kandra and he goes on the run and they hunt him down.
It was completely shocking for me for the first read through. The thing is, Brandon did leave enough clues for you to figure that out if you're being really astute. This is basically based off of Leslie's behavior as the leader. Like, she would talk to him and said that she would never want to hurt him or cause him any harm, that they know each other and things like that. But first I read it, of course, I didn't put two and two together. But man, it was a shocking ending. It was a complete bummer for Wax. Like, you can obviously see that Wax still had feelings for her.
100%. 100%.
Which is kind of awkward considering, like, he's kind of in this arranged marriage. So it's like thinking, how is this going to have an impact on that? What kind of strain is it going to have on him psychologically? It seems like it's pretty horrible at the end because he's just kind of destitute and doesn't want to talk to anybody.
Yeah, and Brandon doesn't back away from that, does he? Like, at all. Like, he embraces that, like, and the psychological impact of that is had throughout this book and the next. Like, Brandon doesn't ignore the fact that this happened at all.
And, and the complete wrench it throws into his relationship between him and Harmony.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because, like, it absolutely knacks up his relationship with, it almost damages his relationship with Steris, but the effect on his relationship with Harmony is far more affected. And one of the things that's interesting in the books is in book 1, he kind of doesn't really know if Harmony's real. Like, he believes, but then Harmony talks to him in the book like a couple of times, and he's like, oh, like he gets the earring. And he meets Kandra, and he's like, oh, Harmony's not like just this god I believe in. He's like a guy upstairs who, like, occasionally sends me guns. Like, this is like, Harmony's like real, like, I believe, but now I believe, capital B. You know, like, now I believe like Moses. I've seen him face to face. A kind of job. It's a different level. And then in this book, he starts off with the earring, relying on Harmony, working with the Kandra, like, hand in glove, like, I am Harmony's weapon. And at the end, he's removed the earring on purpose, so he can't hear Harmony anymore, and he doesn't choose to put it back in.
Right. Because doesn't Milan, like, basically says here, I found the earring, and he kind of rejects it. Because I believe Milan is basically, Harmony is telling Milan, hey, I want to talk to Wax. Here, give him this earring. But he
turns down the call.
Doesn't want to talk to him.
Can you imagine that? God's on the phone for you, and like, no, I'm not listening. But again, there's a message there. Is God talking to us, and do we choose not to listen? And meta message, right?
Yeah. Well, and also there's so many consequences that come about from Sazed/Harmony trying to keep everything in balance by being the combination of two different gods, and it results in these negative consequences, and things become more imbalanced in the process of trying to balance them.
Agreed. And the point is that, like, if you're all powerful, shouldn't life just be great? Right?
Right.
Shouldn't life just be perfect? And the one of the arguments here is that you are very, very powerful, but limited, right? Not omniscient, I think you said was the word you used. Like Harmony is very powerful, but he's not omniscient. He is extremely
not omnipotent either.
But he's extremely close. He's not omnipotent, but he's extremely close with the level of power he has. But because it's got both sides, because of agency, because of his desire to have creation and destruction, change and protection, in the end, he does very little.
Yeah.
But what he does do, he is totally like Wax holds him accountable for it, even though Harmony didn't fully do it. All Harmony does, and this is what we find out, is that he sent the Kandra to keep an eye on Wax, which tells you Wax feels like things happened by accident, by coincidence, but then he realizes, lawman, someone moves us. And like, oh, some of these things that I thought were coincidences in my life, me becoming a lawman, me seeing these deaths, me meeting Lessie, me meeting Wayne, weren't just coincidences. Like Lessie was sent to me. And one of the things that she did is she made me stay in the roughs, and her dying made me go back. So when he wanted me in the roughs, he made me in the roughs. And when he wanted to get me back, he got me back, and he got me back by killing the woman I was in love with. Even though that was a trauma for me. And like, wow, what if like that's a thing and like God is real, but like he allows deaths on purpose, and sometimes maybe even before their time, because it's actually useful to his plans. Like, is that forgivable in God?
Yeah.
And that's a great question.
And this God is not all powerful, but powerful enough that he
could
can
totally manipulate.
Yeah, he can manipulate events and people enough to piss them off so much when they're trying to help, when he wants them to help him.
Yeah, and but we do know too is that when she pulled her spike, that he could not see where she was. So, it was that in combination with her association with another emerging deity here that they hasn't gotten into detail in this book about that yet.
That's going to be book 4 for sure, right?
That's going to be so cool.
I think so. But can I say one of the things that I think is really cool is, I mean, that's really what Dustin just mentioned there is really important. Like, she can take out one of her spikes, which will make her partially insane, at least by any law that we've understood from previous series, but not entirely. She'll retain some of her identity. And to do it, like, the thing that I think is cool about that is the lore from series 1 is consistent in series 2, but it's evolved. So we know that, for example, the Kandra have 2 spikes because then it meant that when Ruin took power, they could make the sacrifice, remove their spikes, and thereby stop him getting the atium. Yeah? Because they could resist his control by removing a spike. So Brandon set up in the Hero of Ages, he told us that's what happens with Kandra. So then when she removes a spike, we're thinking, aha, he told us that meant Ruin couldn't do it, and Harmony is Ruin, so Harmony can't do it. That makes sense. And then, of course, do you remember like that Vin's earring was what stopped her pulling in by preservation? And the removal of the earring is what allows her to use the mists and then win. Yeah?
Yeah.
Right.
And the insertion of metal in Spook is what allows Ruin to influence him. Pinrod, metal getting into people in accidental ways. And so then when he shoots her with the gun, with the earring,
the aluminum gun,
bullet, it makes perfect sense. She's like, why would you waste time shooting me? You know it's not going to do anything. Uh-oh. It's a hemorrhagic spike. Now Harmony can take control, and Harmony does. And it's utterly tragic because it's the one thing she feared more than anything. And then she commits Kandra suicide. But which is even more awful, right? Because it means that she would rather cease existing than what Wax doomed her to. which is
Yeah.
controlled by a god that she does not worship and she does not believe is right. And the thing is, you can believe that if there's a mind control alien like controlling you, I'd rather be dead. You can almost imagine yourself feeling that way and thinking, is this like how right or wrong is Palm? Anyway, so clever, but then you're holding the smoking gun and realizing, did I do that? Or have I been tricked into doing this because God couldn't do it himself?
Mm-hmm.
And then is a God who would do that worthy of worship? And in the book, I think Harmony's right. But at the same time, Wax isn't wrong to think that. Those are the questions I love. The ones that are not just simply, who was right, Luke Skywalker or the Emperor? It's pretty clear, which way that should have gone down.
Right.
But this kind of question, this kind of conflicted hero, Wax is not an idiot for turning his back on God. Like Brandon has given us a legitimate, acceptable reason where God's not a moron. Like we were just talking about the Spider-Man film, and it relies on people being morons for some of it to work. Neither Harmony nor Wax are morons in this book. They both have a point, but you can see that both of them may be right and both of them may be wrong. And that is excellent fiction.
Definitely.
Can I run a defense for Palm, aka Leslie?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think she's at all insane. And the reason I think that's the case is because she had a definite reason for pulling one of her spikes. And the reason was because she legitimately fell in love with Wax.
True.
And because she had to terminate that relationship, it seems like it was traumatizing in such a way that she hated Harmony for having to put, I think that she says that he knew that was going to happen, but she didn't. She didn't know she was going to fall in love with Wax, but she believes that Harmony did, and that she would have to go through all of that, not knowing that was going to happen. So she has legitimate gripes
absolutely.
against Harmony.
I agree that she has reason for what she does. I absolutely do. And I could argue that she is right. And that is actually a thing. But
I'm not saying that she's right. I'm just saying I don't think she's insane.
But you see, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that she could be well-reasoned. She could even be argued to be right and have a purpose. But when she removes that spike, I believe that by the definition of insanity, she does become insane.
I don't know. I think she just is more
I'm not saying that means that she, just to be clear, people can be insane without being psychotic killers. I've met many people who are legally insane who can have a full conversation with you and make many good decisions. But what I'm saying is I believe she becomes not fully in control of her actions and doesn't understand the consequences anymore of some of what she's doing. And her reasoning is impaired because she literally removes what we would call part of her brain.
Right.
Well, here's what maybe Sanderson is actually not making this explicit, which is why we can argue over these things.
Yeah.
So my reasoning is she has a passion. I don't know if that passion necessarily makes you insane. So the reason I want to defend her.
At all. I'm talking about the spikes.
The spikes. I know she pulled it out, but
so she needs them to be sapient. Without them, she is not. It's not
I don't know. She was able to function.
So my argument is not that her decisions show that she's insane. That's not my argument at all. People can do stuff like that being completely sane. It's my argument is that without those two spikes, you're a mist wraith. Yeah, like you literally have no sentience at all. You just blob around like a piece of goop.
Mhm.
Well, I think the case is that she's trying to argue is that with two spikes, you don't have
free will,
complete sentience and free will. So she sees that everything is a game of manipulation on her end. And
agreed. And with two spikes, by the way, you have full sapience, but it's controlled sapience if Sazed wishes it, and that's a threat. And she says, I'd rather live half a life where I'm not fully maybe as human as I could be, because that's a free life. That's her choice, right? To say, I'd rather live free with only half of my sapience than live with full consciousness under control, under threat of control. Because he doesn't control them all the time, but he could. And in her case, he would. Because he clearly isn't controlling Tensoon most of the time.
No.
Because Tensoon does what he says.
Just chilling. Yeah.
Yeah. But
I love Tensoon coming back, by the way.
Yeah. And can I just say that's one of the things is when in the other book, when they do get together, he does explicitly say that Tensoon is like, because Wax is like, he wants me to be his preservation. And he's like, no, he doesn't. He's like, I'm his preservation. Tensoon, the Khandra. I'm the preservation. You're the ruin, mate. He's like, oh, yeah, I am. It's like, Wax is a good guy, but Wax is what he uses to provoke change. The Khandra is what he uses to preserve, because the Khandra have been there since forever. They find it very difficult to change, which is funny considering they're shapeshifters. And Wax is the new technology, the new way of thinking, and that's why Wax has to be the one to challenge harmony. And there's, by the way, crack theory. This is a real crack theory, but there is a theory on the internet that harmony is getting Wax ready to be the person who ends harmony.
Oh, interesting.
Because he doesn't think that this situation with the shard should continue forever. So he's actually preparing Wax to be the person who maybe can end him for the right reasons.
Interesting.
That is a crack theory. I don't endorse it, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Me neither.
Possible.
I'm not. I don't know.
I don't think so.
That's way out there.
That's way out there. But there's people like, God is making his own assassin. It's a cool idea. You would
assume that he'd use someone else, like Kelsey or something. It's more on
Kelsey,
the inside.
Oh my goodness, Kelsey. So Wayne's progression's great. Steris, we just don't see enough of in this book, but she progresses in this book. One of the things
I loved her in this book. She was so funny. Like, she's always funny. She is basically, when they went to that party, she's basically telling Wax, like, even her jokes are like pre-written, arranged things that she writes down. I was like, man, she is one character that is pretty funny.
I think
unintentionally funny, but funny.
I think almost everyone who's read Steris likes Steris. And
I like Steris.
Is really good. Like, one of the things that's clear is, you mentioned before, he was in love with Leslie, right? So when he gets to town and they come in for the arranged marriage, she says, like, I fully accept you don't love me. And I never actually expect it of you. But will you abide by the contract? And he's like, I will. And she's like, well, so will I. And if you want mistresses, please refer to section 7. And I also might have some dalliances. That's covered in 7b. Like, because she's saying, I totally get that there's no way we could have true romantic feelings for each other. We just met. But she's just doing it in this super, like, detached way that is part of who she is. But as they spend time together, I think even in the first book, but especially in this book, you can see now that their relationship has developed. And it's not romance. It's not what he had with Leslie, but it's a true fondness. Like, he isn't just tolerating the weird woman anymore. Like, there's a real affection for Steris, and I love it how he appreciates some things that she does. Like, she's got some like medals on her because she's like, yeah, my husband has his crazy dalliances, and like when they get to the party and it's in a skyscraper, and they're like maybe we'll just jump up, and she's like, yep, I wore a dark undergarments for that purpose. He's like, and the thing is though, that like when he takes her in his arms and they jump, like she finds it stimulating, right? She's excited by it. She finds it passionate. And Steris is so not like that most of the time that it's cool. And like she clings to him, and there's a physicality and a sexualness, but also just an excitement, like a roller coaster excitement. And it helps us realize that Steris struggles to show her affection, right? But she is human. She does feel these things. She just can't maybe communicate it as easily. And as someone who has autistic friends, right? Seriously, like legitimately in my own life, they feel everything I feel, but like they don't always communicate it in the way I've been trained to think humans communicate those things. They show their excitement in a way that sometimes feels just hard to understand for me and the way my mind works. And they show their hatred or dislike in ways that are surprising to me sometimes, even as someone who's known them a long time. And I think that Steris is an interesting insight into maybe someone who's a bit like that, who does feel everything, but has a certain communication challenge, maybe I can call it that without being ridiculous, where it doesn't come out the way that inside she is. Because Steris isn't cold, but she comes across that way. And I think by taking a long time with the relationship, Brandon treats it very well. And I think it's an excellent romance. And in book 3, like I was worried that he might get together with Marasi. And I'm like, especially in book 1, I thought that was the story. But then I started thinking, I like this Steris girl. I really want him to stay loyal to her. And then when Leslie came back into it, I'm like, no, don't have it be Leslie, because I really want the Steris thing to work out. And then and at the end of this book, he comes back to their like townhouse or whatever, and he doesn't want to talk to anyone, and there's no triumph. And even though the police guy is going to be the new boss, and they're wrapping everything up nice and neatly, it's not wrapped up neatly for him. He just had to kill his wife for the second time, and like he won't talk to him. And Steris comes in, and she just goes over to him, and she just kneels down at his feet and puts her head in his lap, and she's just there, and she doesn't make him talk. She doesn't ask him to talk about Leslie. She doesn't ask for answers. She doesn't say, why are you mourning this person who was killing people and is supposedly already gone? Doesn't have any expectations, and she's just present, and he allows her to stay. And it's an indication for me that Steris has become very good for him, like in more than just an arranged marriage way, that she now she isn't Leslie, and she doesn't have to be, but that there is something more than just tolerance in their relationship.
That seems like true love right there. That scene that you were describing, especially like she gave him exactly what he needed without even needing to discuss it. And that's it. I actually like the romance between them, between Wax and Steris. I like that more than the romance between Vin and Elend in Era 1, even though I like Era 1 overall slightly more than Era 2. I just like the dynamics between them a little more, I would say.
I think one of the things we can see is that Brandon's grown as a writer. I'm not even kidding. Like I think his writing skills are better. And I think we can see some of the character development of people like Morassi and Wayne and Wax and Steris. It's very, very good. It's very, very well thought through.
It's definitely a different relationship because you have Vin, Vin and Elend are like barely mature, and Wax is, he's a mature adult. He's in his 40s. So we do see that Vin's relationship is more teen angsty, and Wax's is more pragmatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
definitely.
And like her love triangle is like hot bad boy or hot good boy. And and like Wax's triangle is my ex-wife as a widower and my politically effective marriage. Do I want to be alone forever? Mm-hmm. And that's a different challenge. And can I just say that there are many people who lose the love of their life too soon. And that question of, is it like allowed for me to fall in love again? Is it in some way a betrayal of my previous love? Again, these are questions Brandon's throwing out and not answering. He's letting us decide for ourselves if we think that's not okay.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Wax says
that happens a lot for sure. Yeah, I've had that happen with family members. Like my grandma on my mom's side of my family out-survived my grandpa by 20 years or so. So she almost remarried at one point, but ended up not doing so. But I'm sure, and you see this in all sorts of fiction too, where there's this sort of like your significant other dies and you feel wrong about dating someone else even though they're dead. That's definitely a common but very powerful theme.
It's great when you can have a fantasy world, but it feels real. And one of the reasons it feels real is because the humans in it do things we can relate to. And I think it's like some people sometimes look at fantasy slightly with their noses raised, as in like, read some real literature.
Yeah.
And but the point is, look at what Brandon's doing. He's talking about getting over being a widower, which you never get over. And like the thing is, Wax is not going to get over Lessie. That will always be a part of his life. And it should be, but maybe what he can do is not remove it, but use that as part of who he is, but not all that he is, and still have joy. And one of the reasons we see people sometimes engage in things like suicide is because they believe there is no possible joy in the future. And remember, Brandon has covered in this book being a widower, suicide, doing things that hurt the ones you love. Like one of the reasons that Wayne tries to mess up the marriage with Steris is that he doesn't think Steris is like, it's his loyalty to Lessie. And like, we were a happy family, you and Lessie with me as the kid, and like, you're not my real mom. And like,
I didn't think about that before, but that's
it's
true.
definitely part of it, and it's definitely like.
But doesn't Wayne favor Morassi though as a partner?
No, sorry, he does. And one of the reasons he resents Steris is he thinks Wax doesn't love her. He thinks Wax is doing himself a disservice for political and money reasons, because Wax is like sacrificing himself. And at the very first chapters of Alloy Void, that is what Wax is doing. And he's like, I'm saving him from himself, just like I saved him from that boring life as an accountant or like a house rule. I've got to save him now from this bad girl. And you know what? I know guys who've tried to save their mates from what they perceived as bad girlfriends. And they're stupid for trying that. Like, you just got to let people figure things out for themselves. But I get it. And I don't think Wayne is a villain for doing it. I think he's misguided. But yeah.
Yeah, good
Speaking
point.
of Morassi, did you guys want to just kind of talk about her development in this particular
Love
book?
Morassi. Do that. Tell us what you like about Morassi.
Well, obviously, it's an interesting dynamic in this because she gets a promotion as like an assistant to what's basically like the chief of police,
Very
which
quick
is like a
promotion.
very, very coveted like position. So this also gets her scorned from her peers because many of them don't feel that she deserves the position, and they think it's more of a nepotistic thing because of Wax's position. But she is reassured by the chief that,
Arundel.
hey, I looked at all of our test scores and you're like the perfect one to be in here. And I'd rather have somebody that's not interested and ambitious in climbing the ladder to be in this position. He did want a new blood. He's not interested in like careerists, being his assistant. So she kind of got reaffirmed that yeah, she's pretty badass when it comes to like detective logic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I love again, I'm just going to talk about Brandon as a writer. Like I'm basically in love with Brandon Sanderson. So, but like one of the other things I think, just again, look at Brandon in era 1, right? Vin is I think, a really strong female character, right? She really is, but she's the only one, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she's strong in a very, what a teenage boy thinks a strong female character would be. Like a badass, like Tifa from Final Fantasy VII, right? Badass hot chick who kicks trash and takes names. Like she can do all the things that men do, but better. And like I love Vin. I love Vin. She's like a miniature like nuke. But in this series, like you can see that Brandon has grown as an author. And so he's still thinking, hang on a minute, they're in this culture where men still have a lot of the control, a lot of the political influence, etc. And he doesn't just chuck that out the window. What he does, he says, how can I, within this world that I've built, make interesting, powerful, strong female characters? And he doesn't just make them all gunslingers, right? Now, Lessie absolutely is that. She's gunslinger. She wears a duster. She's, kicking out with the blokes. Marassi's not. Marassi likes to wear dresses and be a bit girly, but Marassi is incredibly intelligent. She's well researched. She can get surprised at times, but she's very brave. If she needs to shoot a rifle, she can do so. But that isn't what defines her. It's actually her intelligence and her understanding of statistics that defines her. And she is freaking great investigator. And we get to see her in this book investigate. Like she's the one who brings down the corrupt governor. She's the one who is like, who moves forward and actually works things out. And she calls Wax on some of his crap. Like she's the one who says, you just gallivant off and shoot who you want to shoot. And like we pick up the pieces, we the cops. And she has joined the force and she is doing it the old fashioned way. And I think that's really cool to show that you can be a powerful character and be Marassi and not be super like diving through with 2 guns, Matrix style. She's not Trinity, but she's still a strong woman. And Steris, more subtly, is also a strong woman. And Steris never really shoots anybody. She never like does any hand-to-hand combat or anything, but Steris is absolutely a strong woman. And she's absolutely useful to the plot. And she's absolutely got autonomy and power and is beloved. And then lastly, he introduces Milan. Reintroduces actually. And Milan...
Milan,
sorry. And Milan is a conjurer, so guess what? She can kick the most butt and take the most names because she's basically invincible.
She's also like an Amazon, isn't she? Like 6'5" or something.
Yeah, she's built herself to be like this incredibly busty, But the thing is that like I know women, right? I know a lot of women. I have 5 sisters. I have 3 sisters-in-law. I have a wife. I have multiple daughters. And like one of the things that a lot of these women wish is that they could control how they look, right? That is, I think for all of us, we could like that. But for women, I'm just saying it's a big deal. for many of them to just say, I just wish I could change some of how I look. And that's the dream with Conjure, right?
They can look however they want.
Yep.
Well, in the next one, she even has
one of my favorite scenes, though, is when she produces a pistol from her boob.
Yeah.
Like it splits open. It splits open, and I think she tries to give the gun to somebody.
And they're just like,
whack. Well, yeah, it was hilarious.
I like one of them in the next one where they have a bag and it's all her spare skulls. Like, that's my favorite one. Anyway, but so just I think one of the things that I'm just saying that you can see is that Brandon's.
I'm just gonna leave for a few minutes, guys. Like I mentioned earlier, I'll be right back. You guys keep talking, okay?
I just think it shows Brandon's advancement as an author. That I don't think Vin's a bad portrayal. I think Vin's an excellent portrayal, but I think he's shown that he realizes his audience want more different kinds of powerful women, not just fighter chicks. And so he's got fighter chicks, and there's a legitimate reason that Milan's the best. It isn't just Yeah,
I was going to say there's a really interesting meta way that he talks about gender roles in this in particular, and when he's talking about Marasi. So one of the things that is mentioned, and this is from another character talking to Marasi, about how the character mentions that they don't see many women constables. And then Marasi just kind of thinks to herself about the Ascendant Warrior, which is a woman. And she's like, well, if somebody like the Ascendant Warrior can be a woman, there shouldn't be any reason why I couldn't be a constable.
And one of the things that's also interesting is that even though this is a little bit of an Earth analog, it isn't a perfect Earth analog, right? And nor should it be. And like one of the things we find out is most lawyers are women, which I thought was really cool. Like it's a profession that like a lot of women have gotten into in their version of the world. And it's just like you think about how that would change the dynamics of things. So he isn't just going with like all the tropes. He's saying this is how a world could legitimately have developed. And yeah, I just think his the characters he has I find compelling. And it's interesting because in most things, like a lot of blokes, I guess, my favorite characters are almost always the male characters. But in this, I think Steris is probably my favorite character. I like Wax. I know some people think Wax is boring, but I don't find Wax boring. I love Wax. And so like Wax and Steris are just like my favorite characters, but I like them. Oh, and we forgot Renette. But what do you think of Renette? The Q, if you will, to the James Bond that is Wax.
Yeah, she definitely is. The Q in the series, she's the one making up the elementic gadgets, and she's kind of the brains behind creating haze killer type technology in the current world that they're in. Because I know there's a couple instances where he goes up against like modern haze killers.
Yes.
Which are those who are already ready to do battle with Elementers. So they have things like, aluminum bullets and
non-metal weapons.
Right. So her role is to help him deal with not only haze killers, but other Allomancers that can affect things. Metalborn. So, what was it? She was the one that crafted the bullet made out of the spike, right?
Yeah, and it was her, and she also gives him the retractable claw. When because one of the things is he can only push, right? He's not like
it allows him to pull,
push and pull. Right? So when he's going up a high building, it's really tricky. And in order to go building and like not like go out and out and out, you have to like shoot a shotgun to push yourself back in. But with this retractable thing, he can do it, and he then uses it as a weapon in like the fight because he can pull it out but also pull it back. So it becomes like a melee weapon for him, which is super cool because it has this like it's almost like a whip, but one that you can justify using because he can actually control it with allomancy, which is pretty cool. And so he uses the retractor to climb up when they're doing the flipping party. Also uses a weapon in the crowd, and I think that's really clever and cool how it has that happen. And one of the things is, again, just talking about the cleverness of the overall plot. Like Bleeder is, of course, a woman, Palm. Yeah, the conjurer you mentioned, who is defying Harmony's control and is prepared to risk her sapience in order to be free, which is her argument, right? That freedom, even if it's a limited freedom, is better than control by you. And it's and in many ways you could say she's doing that for love. But it's, you know, one thing that's really interesting, if I could just say a quote by her, she says that like she's going to spare Wax because obviously she's in love with Wax, but she said, I'm going to have to kill Wayne because he's too much of preservation.
That's right.
This is
I remember
Wayne we're talking about.
That.
Like she sees Wayne as like too much preservation.
Tool.
And I
get it because he has, you know, healing ability, and he doesn't kill people for the most part. You know, he disables them, but he doesn't like kill people to death. You know.
I guess that's true. I guess that is true. I guess I didn't
preserve life in that way.
Especially the healing could really, like, you know, being a blood maker, that could really be seen as preserving, I guess. And
his act of ruin, like, totally messes him up, you know, when he killed the innocent. Like, he is really, really, really distraught over that. You know, so that's another thing, too, to consider.
That's a really good point, Dusty. That isn't something I had considered. That especially the gold thing, I hadn't really thought of. And like, another thing again that we didn't mention about Marasi is, of course, Marasi has the useless power.
She used a pretty good effect here in this book,
and she did in the last, right? And so that's one of the things I like is that he always finds a way to just use it, like a clever way to use it that has a point. And it just reminds us that, like, what other people see as useless, if you can think cleverly, can become useful. And that's true of human beings as well, right? Like,
right. Because I know in this instance, she found the people who were responsible for rioting the crowds, and she was pretty short-staffed. I think the people that she was with got dealt with pretty quickly, and she dove under their carriage, and she's like, well, let me use my power so my backup arrives pretty quickly, you know, and they won't know at all that there's already backup out here that's going to help out with this fight.
And she stops the assassination with it as well.
Oh, that's right.
The governor, she puts
the fake assassination.
And like, so like, and the thing is, one of the things that we don't realize is that, like, they wanted to prove that the governor was a conjurer, right? Like the attempted assassination of Pawn would have proven that Harmony's messing with them. And of course, when Harmony sends out his agents to stop everybody, and then she uses the thing that makes them all turn to goo, then of course what happens? People are like, oh, so the people who were making us feel good are actually manipulating us. Oh, God is manipulating us. And this could have created the riot experience. And that's what she was wanting. She wants to destroy harmony, like actual harmony, to hurt harmony, God harmony. And it's clever.
So
it's clever.
what did I miss there that you guys were talking about while I was gone?
Talked about Raynette and the advancement of like cool like alchemical weapons. And we talked about how Wayne Pond says that Wayne is too much of harmony. That like she can't like let him live. Like she's like, I'm gonna like let you live, Wax, but I need to get rid of Wayne. Like he's too much of preservation. Like, like not something I'd really considered. And Dusty talked about how Wayne does have those kind of traits, and then just talked about how Marassi's power seems useless, but in every book it gets used for something really useful. And just like,
and she thinks it's that way at first, but it actually ends up being really useful because she can slow time, right?
Yeah,
and she ends up using that a lot of her speed bubbles, where you can like allowing that to prevent people from getting shot and to allow enemies that could get to get shot that would not have been able to get shot otherwise.
Correct. And it's just one of Brandon's themes, isn't it? That people who appear useless aren't useless.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a lot of
power,
those.
She has to be close to her enemies in order for it to be pretty well affected.
Yeah. No, and a lot of those weapons are really cool too, and Raynette is always cool.
Yeah, the Q. We were just saying she's like the Q to his James Bond.
Yeah, she is. Like, yeah,
guy. And
so you guys were just talking about Marasi too, there, right?
Yeah, we just talked about Marasi, her abilities, how cool she is, how developed she is as a character, and even without being like, she isn't a better shot than Wax or faster than Wax or more powerful than Wax. She just absolutely is not any of those things. But
you know what's interesting too, that just now that you mentioned, in the prologue, Wax is a bad shot. So he's definitely gotten a lot of practice from the prologue till now, because he's like an expert. But in the beginning, in that prologue, he was just missing a bunch of shots, and it wasn't very good.
But that's also realistic as well. Like, even good shots miss shots as well. Like, and even later on, now that he's like Dawn Shot, right? I mean, he's like renownedly good now. And even now, sometimes he still fires shots for like cover or doesn't take people out with every shot. Again, very realistic.
Definitely.
I like how he runs out of bullets.
He shoots bullets in midair to change their trajectory.
Yeah, I love that. I love all that stuff that happens in the book. Shoot bullets in midair and change their trajectory in midair while they're firing, and then like slowing down the bullets and all that kind of stuff is so cool.
One of the things Brandon loves to do is like crazy things that happen in like manga films or martial arts films, and then he's like
Matrix movies.
Yeah, and he's like, but like, how can I make that actually happen and it be realistic?
Yeah. Like, how can I make that work with my hard magic system?
Yeah, correct.
And still be really cool.
And the thing is, because he explains the system, instead of always feeling like cheap shots, we think, oh, that's clever. And like one of the things that Brandon's done, some people would argue too much, is the death fake out or someone coming back from the dead.
Oh yeah. I wouldn't say he's done that too much, because every time he does it, I'm totally shocked by it. I'm still not expecting fake out deaths, even though he does it so often.
Agreed. But like the other thing is, they're not really fake out deaths. Most of them are actual deaths.
Well, like Kelsier and Vin and all those characters from Era 1, they literally actually did die. Yeah, that's true.
But one of his points is, one of the things he's trying to get us ready for in the Cosmere is, I'm not actually just dealing with physical life. A lot of my story is going to happen with shadows. And we're finding now that like cognitive shadows, which is what Kelsier is now. So he's not gotten the beyond, but his cognitive essence is still around, can do quite a lot of freaking stuff. And if you can get reattached to a physical form, then you're back, baby. And like that is what the heralds in Stormlight Archive are all about. And so one of the things we've realized is that death in Sanderson's worlds, there's more than one level to it.
Yeah, because there are the three realms, right?
Yeah. You can die physically, but still be around cognitively if you have enough energy, magic, investiture. There's the word. But the thing is, there still is ultimate death, and that's where Elend and Villain have gone, for example. They've gone to ultimate death. But what he's showing us is, I'm just playing with a slightly different rulescape. The stakes are still there, and they're still legitimate. But one of the things I'm showing you is, one of the tropes I'm playing with is the idea of resurrection and what is resurrection. And like, so yeah. And in like, when he introduces things that can kill even people who are heavily invested, even cognitive shadows, and you're like, oh my goodness, you've upped the game. Because it's one thing to die, it's another thing to be obliterated. And
definitely.
So it's interesting. And of course, the concept that energy cannot be destroyed, well, we're like, well, of course not, right? Yeah, because that's physics.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happens to a human being when they're killed? Do they cease? Or is it like the Lion King? We go back to the ground and our energy is taken by the ground, and then it becomes the grass, and we go.
That's how I learned about death. I think I've mentioned this before, but
the Lion King?
the circle. When my grandpa died when I was 5, I didn't understand death, so my Aunt Kathy took me to theaters to see Lion King, which was in the theater at the time, and learning about the circle of life and all that kind of stuff helped me understand the concept of death.
Yeah, I agree.
Did you also sing the song while you're in the theater?
Yeah, I still like that movie.
Love that movie
because it has so much nostalgic meaning to me. The circle of life.
Well,
But
don't
also,
watch the reboot. It's not half as good.
Yeah, I heard that.
The thing is, the movie Lion King, by the way, I can't not mention it. It's just a great movie. Like it's just a legitimately great movie. And like this, like I cried in that movie. I was like a teenager, and like when Mufasa is killed, like I cried.
Yeah,
like that mattered to me. It hurt. And like when like Rafiki, the monkey, is meeting him, is like whacks him on the head, and he's like, hey, that hurt. He's like, ah, yes, the past can hurt, but you can either learn from it, run from it, or you can learn from it. And he tries to hit him again, and he ducks, and he's like, aha. So what are you going to do? I'm going to take your freaking stick. It's like, that is such a good moment, because that's true, right? The past and the memories of the past can hurt us, and like, but we can learn from it and move on, or we can just put our heads inside. And that's the thing with Wax, is that the past has hurt him. It's not going away unless he exists. And she's died, and he's been a part of it, an unwilling pawn maybe, but a part of it. And he learns to live with it, to not be happy with it, but to live with it, and to have it not destroy him. And
that's actually a good parallel between Wax and his dead fiance, both in book 1 and book 2, with the different dynamics with her coming back as a Kandra in this one.
Well, and she always was a Kandra.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. It's like he thinks that Bleeder is pretending to be Leslie just to get to him. And then, of course, she says things, and he's like, oh, you're not pretending to be Leslie. Leslie was always a Kandra. Leslie was never human. And like, that is as clever a trick as when he had the Kandra pretend to be a Kandra. Like, I'm just like, Brandon Sanderson, you evil genius. You're good at this stuff. No wonder you're building a lair. You know?
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's me. I think this book has got brilliant twists, and I think it has excellent character progression, especially for Wax and Steris, Wayne and Marasi. I think those 4 characters just are given heaps and heaps of character progression, and Steris with actually very little screen time.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, for sure.
And we got an introduction of a new character, Milan.
Yes.
She shows up in the next book, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I remember she gets it on.
One of the things about... Oh, and there's one other thing, actually, that we should mention that I just think is really cool that I haven't mentioned, but I just want to mention, like, really, really quick. This is a background thing that is just like a lovely snippet. At the party, where to get in, Wayne pretends to be like a scientist bloke.
Yeah.
I love that whole scene because this other guy comes up, he's like, what do you think about this scientific thing? And he's like, speed bubble. What's he talking about? And she's like, this. And he comes out and goes, I can't believe you're still dealing with that. I'm far more interested in this now. That's the new thing. And he's like, oh, what? No, that's going to be my theory. And he runs off to get it published first. And then this girl comes up to him and just slaps him across the face. And Wayne probably deserves it. And she's like, but she's slapping him because she thinks he's this old scientist. And she's like, you stole my dad's idea. And it's Tesla. You know what I mean? It's like the Tesla Edison thing. And like he came up with it and you've just stolen it and everyone knows you. So you've got all the credit and it's unrighteous. And she's obviously a designer herself because she's setting up speakers. So she obviously is like a scientist. And he says to her, you know, your talking box thing, do you need a funder? Do you need a bit of investment? Well, guess what? Like inventors say when someone says, would you like me to invest in you? They go, yes, please. And so I think that Wayne is going to end up being like a millionaire because he's going to invest in this crazy woman. And the thing is, it shows that Wayne likes to put things right. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't even the scientist who did it to her dad, but he feels a bit guilty. And so he, as Wayne now, is investing in her career. And he goes up to her at one point and goes, are you the scientist, the daughter of this guy who came up with this? And she's like, you know the truth. And it's such a cool little moment. And you think, I wonder if like Tesla's family felt that way. And like to have that recognized. And then I think that's just one of those little Easter eggs that I wouldn't be surprised if Sanderson pays that off in book 4 by actually having it turn out that Wayne now actually has stacks of cash.
Well, we know in the beginning of this book, Wax mentions that Wayne is wealthy, like from the last book, the Aluminum. Wayne got a cut, so we don't know exactly how wealthy Wayne is.
He has,
but Wax mentions
more than
it,
enough.
And Wayne doesn't really spend money on stuff. He doesn't even have his own residence. He lives with Wax.
But he sends a lot of it to the family, doesn't he? Like, and that's he makes that clear. But
there's a monthly stipend, of course,
but a generous one.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention too, and I thought was pretty interesting, is seeing Wax connect with his Terraceman roots.
Yeah.
So we have, so I guess there was some point in his bloodline after Ladrian where there was some Terraceman blood like introduced there.
Well, absolutely, it's clear, and if you look,
because he has the powers, you know.
Yeah, but it's made clear that his mum is Terrace and his dad is Towny.
His dad probably has some roots to like nobility from, back in the day, because that's basically where Allomancy comes from.
But he married a Terrace woman.
Ladrian. He has his Allomancy from Ladrian and his Terrace powers. But it's interesting because he doesn't connect too much with that side because his grandma is still alive and he visits her, and he's basically doesn't visit her very often. I think he just mentions like one other time before he left to the Rough. But she tries to talk to him, and she's very stern with him about how he's living his life and how she doesn't really approve that much.
And we get more of that in 3, don't we?
Yeah. They get into it more in the next book.
But again, pure Sanderson, right? He's layering it in. We knew he must have some Terrace blood in book 1 because he was a Feruchemist, but they didn't really talk about it at all. Now in this one, he goes to the village. We meet his grandma. We realize that they disapprove of what he's done, but he has like a Terrace name and and then and also this implication that he used to be very Terrace as well, because his uncle Edwarn like disapproved of it. You know, with the whole thing with the banker's coin, the flawed coin, and
he just gave it away.
Yeah, and then the guy didn't use it, ends up getting into debt, and then commits suicide several years later because he's trapped. And it shows Edwarn's idea of what is power compared to Wax's idea of what is a power and what it means to be a hero. And like Edwarn took him to the bank to kind of teach him, like, this is what it's really about. Like, we'll sell loans to rich people who will pay us over time, and to poor people who won't pay us, because then we'll control them and we'll suck them dry. And Wax is like, no, that's not what I want to be. Like, but one of the things that's interesting is the coin itself should be worthless because it's got a defect, but actually that makes it priceless. And one of Brandon's themes is that worthless things that people think are defective are actually surprisingly valuable.
Definitely.
And like that includes people. And like if you look in most of his books, he's deliberately made his heroes or heroines' flaws the reason or part of the reason they're able to have their power.
Yeah, definitely.
Like if Wax doesn't kill Lessie, he is not Waxillium Ladrian. He doesn't become who he is. Even though it's the tragedy of his life, it actually forms him. Is what he is. And like if you look at Kaladin, if Kaladin hadn't been broken enough to need a spren, then he couldn't have reforged that bond and become whole with Syl into who Kaladin becomes in Stormlight Archive.
Well, here's one thing, because I know brokenness is like a big aspect of the Cosmere.
It is.
In Era 2, do they still need to be snapped?
Yeah, that's a good question. People suggest no, because there doesn't seem to be any comments on it. But he hasn't told us no. We just don't see it.
What do you mean by snapped?
If in the first series, Era 1, to trigger your abilities, you had to have like a traumatic experience. And so,
I forgot about that.
So, like when Alen's dad is trying to find out if he's an Allomancer, he takes him and they just beat the crap out of him to try and trigger his allomantic abilities. And obviously, he doesn't have any.
Right.
And so his dad's pretty gutted by that. That's why he has all the bastards instead and beats them until they snap. And then the ones that don't snap, he just gets rid of. The ones that do snap, he keeps as his pawns. He's pretty bad, Strath Venture, right? He's pretty much one of the most out-and-out evil villains.
Yeah,
does.
I think he's a more evil villain than the Lord Ruler.
Yeah,
definitely.
As a person, 100%, Andrew. I don't think there's any argument there. He is despicable. But yeah, in Era 2, I do not believe snapping is mentioned even once.
Okay.
So I believe that is not stated.
So is that a change in the rules of the hard magic system?
We don't know. It might be happening.
That's an interesting aspect, though, too. We know, like throughout Era 1, Vin discovers that some aspects of these hard rules of the hard magic system are actually not the way she thought they were, and some of the rules can be bent or broken.
Yes, and some of them they completely didn't understand. Like they were missing metals, right, and didn't realize those metals existed.
Yeah.
But one of the things we know in Era 2 is the powers are weaker, right? Like so, instead of there's like pretty much no full Feruchemists anymore, like 0. And there's, it seems like there's almost no one is in who's a Mistborn.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
No one. Like
And
not like there's one or
Metalborn
two.
are
But like
real rare too. Well, those
it's
have
like
the one
Yeah.
and one.
Mhm.
yeah, it's like mythical. And so it might be now that it's so diluted that snapping isn't necessary. He hasn't said that in the text, but it might be part of the reason that it's no longer a big thing.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
Because they're living a cushy life in the Elendil Basin. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. At least
well,
Wax is.
they have like food that just grows, like
Like
spontaneous.
modern amenities.
Anyway, but
Yeah.
yeah. So good book.
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely worth reading. Check out all of the Mistborn books. If those of you who are watching probably hopefully have already read them, but if you haven't, check out all of them, Era 1 and Era 2. If you want to really nerd out, read Era 1 and then Secret History and then Era 2. But you can just start at Era 2 also. You don't necessarily you only have to start with Era 1 and also read Secret History if you want to like super nerd out on all the details of stuff, like similar to watching all the MCU movies in chronological order or something like that.
Right. The Arcanum Unbounded has a lot of pretty cool
Yes,
nuggets in there.
Arcanum Unbounded has a lot of cool short stories that we've discussed before that are in the Cosmere too. Yeah. All right, so I know you need to get to bed, Tristram, so we can end it here. Thanks for nerding out with me, guys, as usual. This is always fun. And yeah, for the next time we talk together, let us know whenever you get those Joe Abercrombie standalones, Heroes and Red Country, and we'll talk about those, Tristram. But until you do, the next time we talk, how about we talk about book 3 in Era 2 of the Mistborn series? Sound good?
Yeah, that's right. I'd love to.
All right, cool.
Right.
And thanks for talking about that Spider-Man movie too. Check out, if you've seen that movie, check out our little nerd debate / discussion about whether it lives up to the hype. And so, oh yeah, and next week I'll check with Parker and Dusty. You and I can hopefully talk about Children of Dune, book 3 in the original Dune series with Parker. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Click that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this everywhere. Click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Check out my Patreon page, and the link is in the description as always. And if you give me $10 a month, you can vote on future topics, books, and movies that I will discuss both by myself and with others. And most importantly, like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And check out the Mistborn series and all of Brandon Sanderson's work, like Mistborn or like Stormlight Archive as well, etc. And thanks again, everyone. And anything else you guys want to? Oh yeah, also check out Dusty's channel, Woke Centrist, where we've done lots of similar nerd chats about Wheel of Time, etc., and lots of that kind of stuff. And next week we'll be talking about that book, The Unkindness of Ghosts, right? So check that out too. And anything else you guys want to say before we end it there?
I'm all good.
No, just next week the Unkindness of Ghost, and check out any of my hot takes if you want. They're not too long. They're pretty short, like 20-minute videos about.
Yeah, your short hot take videos are much shorter than mine. I ramble so much that mine sometimes end up being like 45 minutes. So yeah, check those out too. About the
and I might
Jordan.
do one tonight. I just don't have any particular topic. I have to go look for one.
Okay.
In my archives to see if I want to talk about some hot take.
Cool. Yeah, totally check that out for sure, guys. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. And adios until next time. Have a good night.
Night.